Well, it wasn't a long process, and Notre Dame now has their newest defensive coordinator, former Rutgers head coach, Ohio State defensive coordinator. Chris Ash is the new man to lead the Notre Dame defense. Some mixed feelings on this hire. Let's talk about how we got here and what to know about Coach Ash. Ryan Roberts from A to Z Sports, breaking down everything Notre Dame football, and have to, of course, discuss the newest coaching hire to the Notre Dame staff, defensive coordinator Chris Ash, who has had a very interesting background. I want to talk about how we got here, a little bit about Chris Ash, and just some general feelings about this hire for Notre Dame, because there's a lot of mixed feelings out there, and we'll get to both sides, and I'll let you all decide how you feel ultimately on this initial hire. And then as Coach Ash gets into the position and gets some on-field experience, then we'll be able to change our opinions of just how good of a defensive coordinator he is. But let's start with a little bit of the backstory of how we got here. So obviously, right after the national title game, and we knew that this was going to happen before the national title game, Al Golden had agreed to become the new defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. And it left a big hole, obviously, after an average first year under Coach Golden in 2022. He was one of the best defensive coordinators in all of college football each of the last two seasons, was a big reason that Notre Dame was able to win 14 games and to have a national title berth and have an opportunity to win a national title. So losing him was a massive loss for this Notre Dame program. But obviously, with head coach Marcus Freeman being a defensive coach and being a great defensive mind in his own right, you kind of trust him to find the next great defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. Right or wrong, you kind of have that expectation, at least in your mind. So when this news broke about Coach Golden, there was some names that initially came to the forefront. And honestly, were very exciting names. Names like Jim Leonhard, who of course was the former Wisconsin defensive coordinator. You're also going to hear the name Joe Rossi, and you've heard the name Joe Rossi during the last defensive coordinator search as well when Al Golden was hired. He was the defense coordinator for the Minnesota Golden Gophers, and then Michigan State in 2024. And then also, a little tidbit came out that at least there was a brief conversation with Jim Knowles, former Ohio State defense coordinator that now is taking over the Penn State defense going into the 2025 season. So any of those names, if I would have told you Notre Dame would have hired any of them, and probably it would have been Jim Knowles, Jim Leonhard, and then Joe Rossi as far as the order of excitement for most Notre Dame fans. But either way, if it was any of those coaches, most Notre Dame fans would have been really excited for continuing this trend of great defensive play for Notre Dame. And then out of nowhere, Pete Sampson from The Athletic and John Bryce from Football Scoop both reported almost simultaneously that Chris Ash was a realistic option for this job. And then we quickly found out that not only was he the front runner, he was going to be the next defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, barring something unforeseen down the stretch. Now, this is a really interesting one, because if you go back to earlier in Coach Ash's career, talking about the 2011, 2012, like in that area, he was one of the better defensive coordinators in college football for a couple-year stretch with the Wisconsin Badgers under Brett Bielema. When Brett Bielema went to Arkansas, he went with him for one season, but eventually landed with Ohio State, where he had a couple another impressive years. So from a stretch of like 2010 to 2015 or 2011 to 2015, Chris Ash was considered one of the best defensive minds in college football, at least one of the better active defensive coordinators in college football. And then he gets the Rutgers head coaching job. And that kind of stalled momentum a little bit. Now, I'm not going to hyper focus on that part much, because ultimately he's not going to be the head coach at Notre Dame. So if he's not a good head coach, that's fine. I just need him to be a good defensive coordinator at the end of the day. 2016 to 2019, he's with Rutgers. Not great results, obviously, as a head coach. Then he ends up at Texas on Tom Herman's staff, where he's a defensive analyst in 2019. But then in 2020, he becomes the acting defensive coordinator, and it was not a good year. It just wasn't. Now, a lot of reasons for that, potentially. COVID, the end of the Tom Herman era, not amazing talent, obviously right before the Steve Sarkisian era. So it was a tough situation. It is. But ultimately, it wasn't a good tenure. It wasn't a good tenure there. Rutgers, and then obviously the last few years, He was with the Jacksonville Jaguars and Las Vegas Raiders from 2021 to 2023 and has been out of a coaching job, obviously, this past season. Well, here's the positive. The positive is that he has had some good seasons as a defense coordinator. A couple years with Wisconsin, 1 to 2 years with Ohio State. 1 year was better than the other, but there's been some really good. But then there's also been some really not greats. Arkansas, that 1 year was not great. Texas tenure was not great. And then the Rutgers head coaching era obviously was not great as well. And now he hasn't been an active defensive coordinator since 2015, as far as like being his full-time, since 2020. But the 2020 season was not a very good one. So the last time that he was a good defensive coordinator was 2015. That was the last time. So it has been almost 10 years since he has been considered a good defensive coordinator, which is a little bit of the troubling thing. So here is the boomer bust quality to it. If you get the best of Chris Ash, which I think, like, here's my moderate expectations. I think that as long as they have talent, Chris Ash will be a good defensive coordinator. My problem is that he has been at 10 jobs in the last 25 years. He has been all over the place, different organizations, college, and in the NFL. So is he going to be there long enough, one, to have a sustainable product? The other problem is if he is there long enough to have a sustainable product, is it going to be a good product? We have no proof of concept as far as, is he going to be a long-term fixture as the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, and if he will be successful as a long-term fixture anywhere. So, folks, I am a little bit underwhelmed, to be honest. I understand the appeal of Chris Ash, but I'm wondering what the overall upside is going to be as the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. Folks, put in the comments below. Do you like the hire? Do you dislike the hire? Are you somewhere in between? And as always, go Irish.